Guess what day it is? That's right, folks. It is Tuesday. How you guys doing out there? And you know, it's a funny thing. I totally forgot to change the name of this week's show, but I'll get to that. I'll fix that one time. But either way, how you guys doing out there? And welcome. I'm just double checking to see if how can I put this? Totally double checking to see if all my computer stuff is working the way that I need it to work, you know? It's always a thing. But that's the fun part when it comes to live casting. A little tired today, but that's okay. But either way, I'm so wrong button. Yeah, there we go. I'm Solar Gray, the Cinematic Sorcerer, and what's up, guys? How you guys doing out there? Thank you for coming in to another episode of How We Roll. And boy, like I said, I totally forgot to change the name on today's episode. It's a thing. I do that. Wow. You know, this is a thing, so let's handle some stuff real quick. Just letting you guys know that we're out here, we're doing our thing, and thank you for showing up. If you guys are watching us, then make sure to hit that button down there, roll a critical hit on the subscribe button, and then make sure, totally make sure to hit the notification thing so that you guys get to know when, well, should I say when and how we, when we're doing broadcast. I want to thank everybody for showing up. I might be changing the music here in a minute. And, that's the whole thing on that. But thank you guys, like I said, thank you for showing up. And this is a really, like, end of the day type thing for us. Well, not quite end of the day. It's a new month. And with the new month, I gotta keep taking care of the business. So, if you guys like what we do and all that stuff, send me a letter over at backinthedeck@gmail.com. It's BACKINTHEDECK@gmail.com. You're watching us on YouTube, which is awesome. Hit us up on the social media at backinthedeck. That's our Twitter. That's our Instagram. You know, I think we have a Snapchat, but don't quote me on that because I'm not quite sure where it would go. Either way, and of course, hit us up on SoundCloud where you can download the audio from our shows. Now, if you guys like what we do and you want to help us out, like our wonderful people being Shannon Lay and Paul Mansfield, then you can head right over to patreon.com/BID_P, and you'll be able to access all of our archives. Like, all of it. And, how can I put this? Well, guys, for as little as $1, just as little as $1 a month, you'll have access to everything, including our Patreon-only polls, which helps me pick subjects for each of our shows, of course. And, the higher up tiers you go, we got $1 tiers and $5 tiers and all that stuff. The higher up you go, the more we send you guys things like scenery and terrain, or as I like to say, toys, because I'm big on toys. But yeah, we send guys toys for the stuff that we have been doing. So it's a real thing, and that's some of the stuff that we really appreciate. Speaking of which, I did some pictures, and we'll talk about those today. But with that, I'm gonna say hello, because yeah, it is that time. Now, I've been under the weather for the past couple of weeks. It's really been a thing, but I'm here now, and last week we had a fantastic show. Fantastic show. Last week we had our guest, Brother Bear, showing up in, and I want to thank everybody that's going to be popping up in the chat later on. Looking forward to seeing you guys. But yeah, so if you guys are wondering, like, what the stuff that we do during the week, we got so much. Um, Normally today is one of the days that I give my lectures over at a community center slash game and magic store over in the border of Compton. So big, big, big shout out to Magic City Comics and Games. Mm. And yeah, so that's some of the stuff. Now, last week we talked about getting into 93, and 93 was a major, major deal. But there was a thing that also happened in that time. And within that time, we had a little bit of a change in our paradigms. Okay? And paradigmic change is a really big thing. Around 1993, all right, the console wars had become a real thing. And by that, I mean, when I was in junior high, that was when the Nintendo came out, and then later on in junior high, that was when the Sega system, first the Master System, but nobody had the Master System. Let's be real about that. At least nobody in our neck of the woods had the Master System. But then the Genesis came out, and that became like a real big thing. I had a friend on the block who was in the wheelchair. I've talked about him before. Who had all the systems, and he didn't really join me. Hang on a minute. Yep, starting off the month with a little bit of a. Anyway, we had a friend that had the video game system, and that was big deal. But as video games came down, the tabletop community got smaller and smaller and smaller. And this was a really important thing because at the time, in the 90s, video games were an answer. Well, it answered a major question that tabletop role playing games answered for a long time, and that was, what do you do if you're a lonely kid? All right. Um, if you're a lonely person or an introvert or something like that, you could get together with a small group of other people and you could play Dungeons and Dragons or um, Warhammer, or you can get together in these small little niche places and get together with other people. But with the coming of the Sega Genesis, the console wars had started their price runs. Okay, and what that was they had become far more affordable come these times than they did previously. Okay, the price of the Nintendo had come down, especially to make the way of the Super Nintendo, or the NES to make way for the Super NES. And the Sega Genesis had dropped down in price, and a lot more people had gotten them, which meant the lonely kids who could afford it no longer had to leave the house. And this put a major dent in the availability of games. This was also in the early 90s. This was the time when America Online was coming up, and the Windows system, okay, Windows, I believe it was Windows 3.1, was starting to really become the gold standard. We had Apple's, they weren't Macs yet. We had Apple's slash Macs, and we had the Windows system that came up, and it had all these video games. But more to the point, it had something to do that didn't require a lot of work for individuals, not as much as groups. And this was a blow because this put up a financial barrier, yet another financial barrier for the gamer kids that didn't have a whole lot of money. I did a previous episode about how the $15 for the player's handbook was kind of a mission, and the front-loaded cost of getting a computer was just outer space, along with the front-loaded cost of getting a console, like a Genesis or something like that. You know, um, yeah. Give me just a sec here. Looks like um. So yeah. Huh. So yeah. So now that I've fixed a little bit of the sound, sometimes my sound goes wacky. Um, thus the whole Patreon begging thing. You're starting to get it now. As I was saying, one of the things that became a barrier was the fiscal cost. Like, do you have the front-loaded $100, $200 to buy a console? And the fact is, I didn't. So, being in the geographic location that I was, and having no car and very little access to a car, there was another thing that's out there. Now, you young guys out there, you youngsters, didn't well, you youngsters out there do not um have the scarred and traumatized memories of when phone calls actually costed money on top of your monthly payment. It was simple. If you called someone that was more than 3 miles away, there was a toll charge. So it was X amount of cents per second. So being on the phone, and there were no text messages. There was no text and all that stuff. Um, so talking to people to try and set up a game thing, that was a fiscal cost. And getting to them was a fiscal cost. And getting the books were another fiscal cost. But after you paid off all that stuff and came up with a regular routine, that was all good. But if a video game system came in to your gaming group, you were going to lose at least two people. And this is the thing that happened to me in the early 90s, which was a little tough. That was a little tough out there because I already had very few people in. Now, by this point, I had my friend Bill. And Bill, this guy was a trooper. I talked about him last week. He was a 6'3", maybe 190-pound dude that loved gaming. Like, he loved gaming then as much as I love it now. And he carried his books everywhere. He was like an RPG drug dealer. All right, he would just pop his great big bag on the lunch tables and stuff at school, and he'd be like, "Do you want to play? Come on, first one's free. I got that vampire. I got that battle tech. I got that battle tech, y'all. Come on, yeah, I got that battle tech." And so I could play with him. The thing was, let me see if I can find the map that I had in here. This guy lived a ways away, and it was a fascinating way away because I lived, as you guys know, in South Central Los Angeles, and he lived in a little city called Eagle Rock. Now, this city was like 15, 20 miles away. But again, it was a strange 15 or 20 miles because it was one bus to get to him, just one. We shared the same street, and the bus did go in that direction. So all I had to do was hop on the bus at Figueroa and take it all the way to the end. So we could actually get to each other. Like I said, I'm looking for the map. God, I actually did not plan on bringing this map up again. So this is a little interesting here. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this guy. Okay, so as I was saying, I lived here. Whoa, not there. Yes, I did live there. But I lived right here, right at this little area. And he lived there. All right. So this was me, this was him, and there was one bus that went from my house to his house, and it was pretty awesome. Of course, give or take one or two residential blocks. And he was running the game Vampire the Masquerade, Paper Faces on Parade. And we had our little gaming group had made our first contract with each other, the gaming group contract, which was this company is putting out a bunch of games over the next year and a half. So each of us would buy a game, just one game, just one game. Um, and he was the guy that already had Vampire, so we were trying to cut his costs down as well. So we all started saving up what little cash we could get because we knew the books were coming out. And this company had decided to make role playing games based on the Universal movie monsters, or more to the point, the common horror things out there. So it started with vampires, and then it came the werewolves, and then wizards, and then mummies, and that was what we were going to be doing. And it was neat because, again, just a year earlier, Dracula, starring Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves, was out, and we all had the soundtrack because we were like, "Yeah, we love this. Look at Gary Oldman in that tuxedo and all that stuff." So we would get the paraphernalia from all that stuff. So, we all had the soundtrack, and this was where we really learned like game atmosphere because his mom was the cool lady that all the high school kids kind of wanted to commit hanky and or panky with, myself included. And she was like, "Oh, you guys are cute, but no, you guys can use the living room and do the thing. I'm gonna either knit a brand new shirt or play one of the 18 different musical instruments I played." And again, this woman was pretty freaking amazing. Like that hippie mom that didn't turn out to be like a fascist once she hit over 30 or 40. Anyway, we were playing the games, and that all that stuff was cool. With my other gaming groups, life had started getting in the way with Bear because he had to go to college and figure out a way to move out of his mom's house and start his own family and stuff like that. And so, if you guys are noticing a theme, and there is a theme, there is a lot of traveling for me in order to become a gamer. As I said, it was I'm here, and first, first I had to go here, then I had to go back down here, and then here, and then here, and just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And much like this map, there wasn't anything close around here. Okay, that was a really, really, really crippling thing. Like I understood it at the time, but the people in my immediate circles didn't, because again, fish discover water last. So it's like the stuff that was in our neighborhood was the stuff that was the stuff that was available. So why you complaining? And it was a tough sell, a really tough sell for a lot of the folks in the neighborhood. So I came up with these games, but the part I'm kind of leaving out is I'm a really positive person now. I really am. I'm all about hope and doing all this stuff, but that was not the case in the 90s. In the 90s, I was dark. I had a really, really not dark demeanor. Like, I didn't use like baby powder as foundation and all that stuff because that would just look funny on a black guy. But, but I had an affinity for dark things. The vermin of the world, death, so much death. And it was my way of coping with all the stuff that I'd grown up seeing, all the gang violence, all the police murder, the fires, the riot, the school shootings. I had taken on a dark demeanor. Not that the other kids in the neighborhood hadn't seen it, but we all coped with it in a different way. Okay. Some of the kids had
become like gangsters, and some of the other kids had become hardcore Christian. Just we coped in whatever way we could, and one of us had to go dark, you know. So I was the one that got into monsters and vile things, you know. To this day, I'm not really affected by kittens. I'm sorry. I mean, they're cute, but I don't have the emotional thing. But I do make the squee noises when I see like giant spiders or reptiles or things like that. Um, so me bringing these games where all of the stories were based on understanding the point of view of the monster didn't go over well in my neck of the woods. Primarily because the kids and my peers in my neighborhood, they didn't see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as regular kids. And this was a consequence of them not exploring as much as I did. Because, again, fish discover water last. So the more I left the neighborhood, when I saw the better that was out there, and by better I mean cleaner areas, stores with more food options. Um, Essentially, when I discovered the middle class and started walking amongst them, like a South Central based Jane Goodall, when I saw how much better it could be, I was personally inspired and enthralled, and much like certain redheaded swimmers, I wanted to be part of that world. And um, this was a main motivator. Like, I didn't want them to accept ghetto me because I was never really ghetto. I was always closer to closer to that demographic culturally. You know, I read the books that they read. I liked watching the TV that they ended up watching. Um, and it was just one of those things where I resonated more there. But they, for all of their love, the majority of them did not see me as one of them. They saw me as what they were taught to see me as. Okay, in our culture, we we hold on hard to ideas of hierarchy. Okay, not because we want to be better than the next person, but we're afraid of being worse than anyone. Um, so this idea of like, what, you think you're better than me? And it's like, no, I just want to make sure that, no, I think that you might be better than me, and I can't have that. That's really what a lot of stuff comes down to. And on the internet, you can see it all the time, all the time. It's not that person A thinks person B believes that person B is better than person A, but it's person A wants to make sure that they get heard as well and that they matter too, you know. And but we treat things, especially in the middle class, with this zero sum thought that says, well, if that person over there matters, then that person over there can't matter because there's only so much care that we have. There's only so much compassion that we have. And me being the black kid was a point of curiosity. They had never interacted with black people, especially not from my neighborhood. So they came up with all those microaggressions, like being hit with a spoon, asking all these questions about the hood. And I'm like, just come to my house and hang out, and eventually you'll learn and see. And they're like, oh no, I can't do that, you know. And this didn't fit well with my family. Okay, my family was like, if they're not willing to come see you, then they're not really your friends. And I'm like, it's more complicated than that, Mom. And we are talking about kids. You know, they may be teenagers, but they don't have agency of their own. So the ones that would be willing were the ones that can never get permission, or they're the ones that couldn't get the resources. So that became a thing. It was real. Um, I had a few friends. You guys met them on the last show. last week with Bear, who would give people rides and all that jazz. But my friends from the north weren't like that, except Bill. And ironically, Bill was the only one that ever got mugged, and he and I got mugged together while I was waiting on the bus stop with him. We didn't lose much. But yeah, it happened, and he kept his mouth shut about it because he knew that if he told anybody, they wouldn't want him coming to see me again. Good friend. That was not meant ironically. That was a good friend move. Um, One of the things though that started to grind, okay, was when I would go with my friends that weren't Bill and Bear. When those two groups of friends weren't available, everywhere else, one, I was forced to play games that were set in fantasy settings. If not Dungeons and Dragons directly, it was Ars Magica. If it wasn't Ars Magica or Dungeons and Dragons, it was one of the myriad of analogs. But everything set in everything that was set in the Tolkien fantasy realm, and there was something a little off. There was something off, and this was when I first really felt the need for representation. Now, I don't want to sound like I have an agenda or anything like that, but when I was young and reading comic books, there's a TV show that we talk about on my Monday show called Buster Recap called Cloak and Dagger. And I was huge on Cloak and Dagger as a kid because it was a skinny black kid that wore a cloak that could teleport and that absorbed the darkness of other people and went anywhere in the world. I'm like, dude, has somebody been following me around? But outside of that, I felt represented, but I didn't realize the other places that I wasn't represented. Because again, fish discover water last. If there's never really been a place for you, how do you know, how could you start to feel bad if there's not a place for you? And a lot of the places that I would duck into, and you might just say these are jerk players, but just follow, okay? Because I don't think that these guys were aggressively exclusive. I don't think that they weren't intentionally trying to hurt my feelings, okay? But always playing these fantasy games, these fantasy games that were based in the Tolkien thing, there's no room for people that look like me. And I know it's a game of pretend, but as I'm pretending to be an elf, the players of the other characters still saw my black human skin. And they interacted with my character to the best they could. But you see, when you end up seeing things like medieval cottages, and the friend that you're playing with looks like me, there is a cognitive dissonance. Because during the days of, all those times of when knights and mayors raised their swords for ladies fair, those knights didn't look like me. Other members of the staff looked like me. Other members of society looked like me, or should I say not members of society, but I'm gonna just say it, all right? The people that looked like me were slaves, and the people that played these games knew that and didn't really know about the bias that they were showing. And when that comes up, we get into this long thing of no, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm like, yeah, but that's how you're acting, you know? So asking for mindfulness in gaming circles, that kind of became a thing. That really, really kind of became a thing. And so it got pretty hard. And what I definitely noticed was something that I'd seen in my own house in the stories that I read, and in the things I liked, which was being a person of color and being into fiction, at least in my region, gave you more of a sci-fi affinity. Okay, definitely gave me more of a sci-fi affinity. And I ain't talking Star Wars. That's actually one of my older brother's things. He loves him some Star Wars, but Star Wars is still just Tolkien-esque fantasy in space. Okay. Um, yes, there was Lando. Now there's Finn, but check the fan base. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Um, but my mom, and all that stuff, we were more like the Star Trek people. This hopeful future where Earth was just Earth. The people on Earth were just plain human, and we dealt with other species out there. You know, just that was the whole thing. It was like, if you look like me, that meant you were Earthling. You know, you don't have I don't have ripples on my nose. I don't have like a crab on my head. Don't got the pointy ears. You know, that kind of thing. And by this time, Star Trek: The Next Generation had become a thing, and there was a lot more representation of people that looked like me. Except there was always some sort of alien or deformity there, but that's a different subject. But hell, you know what? I could wear the hair clip on my eye, and I'd be like, all right, cool, I'm there. Yeah, that's exactly it. Over in the deck mob, we've got Vixen saying, looking forward to the future rather than reaching for the past. And that's exactly it. And being involved in those, and the gaming circles that I could find, one of the things about the World of Darkness, the vampire stuff, the White Wolf games that Bill ran, was that 100% of them took place at modern times. So, yes, I was a vampire, but I was a vampire running around LA in 1993. All right, slavery was over. Jim Crow was over. Women had voting rights. Like it was a different thing. And those characters that wanted to play those anachronisms, they could play those anachronisms, but they were outnumbered by gamers that liked having magical powers and driver's licenses. You get what I mean? Um, yes, the hair clip. That's right. Let's NP City is actually starting to, say some stuff here real quick. Let's check them out. Yeah, that's right. Shannon's like, hair clip. That's right. And I was a lot more like Geordie LaForge than I was anything, because I was smart and I like to build things. But, so yeah, those were the things that we were into. And I found that having that kind of, having the World of Darkness really helped. Now, when I took this to Bear, and Bear took it to Larry, this is why these guys are my friends to this day. When I brought that problem up and I was able to express it without yelling, screaming, or all that stuff, we did come to a conclusion, and that's where, or not conclusion, but compromise. Because they too like the Dungeons and the Dragons, and you guys heard about Lionheart, and that was like his prize character, but they understood, and this was really good. Now, we wouldn't have gotten this with video games, because Brian didn't get a video game system, Larry didn't get a video game system, Bear didn't, Andrew didn't. Well, Andrew did, but he was always over at the garage playing games with us. But we could then play games like Battletech and Shadowrun and Cyberpunk and all of these different games that were set in like Blade Runner futures, or one of my favorite games that that I still would love to run to this day, but my old gaming circles are kind of into the wind because we're in our 40s, was Paranoia. Paranoia is essentially like Fallout, except you never leave the vault, and the computer that runs it is a lot like the computer from Wall-E. The bad computer that kept all the people fat and happy. So yeah, we would play those games, and we had just as much fun without myself feeling so excluded. And eventually, when Lil Bear, Bear's younger sister, started playing, she felt included as well. When we started playing the games that were from White Wolf, and stuff like FASA and all that stuff. Like I said, the White Wolf games being vampires and fairies and werewolves and mages, but they were all set in modern times, and this was huge. This was amazingly big, because once you opened all that stuff up, there wasn't very much, how can I put it? It's hard to speak Elizabethan English and then see a person of color and not have cognitive dissonance. Okay, it really is difficult. All right, Renaissance Fair is wrapping up here in Southern California, and even in my years of working there, I could wear noble stuff, but I was still treated like an Auslander, because that's people's imaginations only go so far without pointed discipline. All right, this is just the way that goes. And having these games set up with things where you don't have that cognitive dissonance, you could do future speak. You could speak like you were in Heather's. I mean, today it is a little harder for places like the Midwest, that doesn't have a very integrated population, but even here in Los Angeles, on the precious, precious coast, and in places like New York, all the places that are seated with the population centers, there is diversity almost freaking everywhere. But that sci-fi future, this is something that comes up. I talk about this a lot, especially with my co-host for the Game Gallery, because he is into Star Wars, because he likes the rebellion thing and bucking against authority and fighting the system and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of something that my family had to do for a long time. So I don't really want to role play what my day-to-day life is, which is why, like, when it comes to the future stuff, I'm not really one for post-apocalyptica, because as you guys saw pictures of my youth and heard stuff that I was talking about back then, the idea of scavenging for water and playing Fallout and fighting raiders, that's not really my thing. I'm not going to speak for all people of color from the ghetto, that it's not our thing in general. It's definitely not my thing. Because escaping into a period of your life that was worse than it is today doesn't really count as escapism as far as I'm concerned. But hey, I'm a little bitter. But that's what we got on that front. So these were some of the things that ended up being, what's the term I'm looking for? They were real things. And we talked about that stuff, and we have those ideas. Now, today, how do we integrate with that today? Well, I'll tell you. Today, I'm running most of the games. And one thing I have to say for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that they took this into account. They said, okay, we realize that this is Tolkien-esque settings, but they actually made backgrounds for all people of color, believe it or not. If you look into the subcategories of human, like the flavors of human being, they have black people and Asian people and Pacific Islanders and Native Americans. Of course, they're analog, but when you read the description, you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. So the humans are represented as, this is the human race, and now these are the elves, and these are the dwarves, and all that stuff. And I'm like, cool. Why'd it take y'all to the 21st century to get that? So it's not as difficult to get over that cognitive dissonance as it was back in the 80s and 90s. So we're working on it, y'all. We're doing this for you. And when all of these things become a real, what's the term I'm looking for? They've become the standards. They've become the standard, and we're still getting a little better. Now, Players, on the other hand. Funny lesson in life, kids. You can change the laws all you want, and you're going to have to. You're going to have to change laws, make sure that things are fair for people. But people don't change as fast as paperwork. They really don't. Once you say, it's now law, everybody gets represented, there'll still be the ones that will resist the change that's coming because of what's called the sunken cost fallacy. They've been doing it for so long, they just want to keep doing it instead of changing to do something new. So yeah, and a lot of the gamers, especially nowadays, are really into the way that things were in the past. Not that they were hateful or anything like that. It's just, and this is, I have to bring this up because of what I see as the schism between Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and Pathfinder, which was a cleanup of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition. Okay, so just follow me with this for half a second. There were people that went on to 3rd and 3.5 from 2000 all the way until 4th edition, and then 4th edition dropped the ball. 5th edition's fixed things, but the people don't really like 5th edition because it's too simple. It's too good for new players. I don't get to do half of the things that I like to do. I can't create the character that I want in 5th edition in the same way I can in 3.5 edition. When the fact is, you kind of can, you just have to do it in a different way. And, but it really one of those, it really became one of those major things of, this is how I like it. So if there's a new way to do it, what I'm doing has worked for me for a long time. And again, once the rules change, there are people that are going to go for the old ways. They don't want to learn the new names. They don't want to learn the new races or new genders or new stuff. But when the world as a whole falls into these new laws, which takes a little while, they eventually come around, you know. I mean, that's a major thing. So that's life lesson today from an old wizard. But yeah, so that's where I'm sitting on that. So now, since we've got today, I can run games, and there are lots of different techniques. I learned one from some gamers in Latin America that use second and third languages to get hardcore at the table, saying, hey, do you speak Elven? Yeah. Do you speak Spanish? Yeah. Spanish will now be Elven, which is awesome, especially for me as a GM. I'm just like, write down what you're saying on a piece of paper, and I'm going to trust you to tell me the truth of what you said. And don't talk bad about me, because I can speak profanities in 7 languages. I can, especially Spanish. So that's one of the things. The representation and stuff is coming around, and it is more possible. And this is where I love millennials and I love Z-millennials, because you guys are seriously making the changes that we in Generation X didn't realize we needed to make, and then didn't put up enough energy to find out. So that's good on you guys. Really good on you guys. Keep up the good work. But that's about my time. Because I don't spend all day, and I don't want you guys spending all day on the things like that. So but with that, thank you guys for showing up. Major thanks to the people over in NP City. Those guys are really awesome, and I'm loving how they're keeping the thing up and keeping up their conversations. You guys really make it so that it's easier for me to be here. Like I said earlier, check out the Patreon at patreon.com/BID_P. And, log on to the Patreon just for $1 a month. you know, you get pulls, you get stuff like that. And we're working on a lot of the merchandise, which is something that I'm kind of proud of. Real quick, I'm just gonna run you guys through my little gallery. As we do that, check out some of the things that we're gonna have up for sale. We made cottages. What's so special? That's how we storm. Up, down, up, down. If you guys are gamers out there, you guys totally understand. Having this stuff is cool. Putting it away is not. But with that, and again, you know, putting this stuff together, taking the stuff out to community centers, showing the kids that all this stuff isn't necessarily a financial thing, all that stuff. So, but if you got any questions about that and want to talk to us about some of our merchandise or some of the shows coming up on the docket, just head over to backinthedeck@gmail.com. It's BACKINTHEDECK@gmail.com. Look for us over on YouTube. Well, you're on YouTube, so hit that subscribe. Like, roll a critical hit on that subscribe button and follow up that critical hit with that little bell notification. Look for us on the social medias like Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff at @backinthedeck. Join the Facebook group. God, this is how much I'm not a fan of that website anymore. Deckers on the book, and of course, hit our SoundCloud so that you can download. It's been 7 years of back podcast, and we talk about a whole bunch of stuff with a whole bunch of people over the years. And with that, I'm gonna say thank you guys for showing up. Hit us, check out our Twitch channel as well, because yeah, we do Twitch. Matter of fact, most of the stuff we do is on Twitch, and it ain't just for video games, yo. Yeah, and our Twitch channel is twitch.com/BID_P. And yeah, that's us right there, and we just keep stuff all over the place. I'm letting you guys know there. And with that, I'm gonna say thank you guys again for showing up. You guys are really making this worthwhile, making sure I can get out of bed. You know, y'all make sure that I get out of bed on Tuesdays, and that's cool. And that's right, coffee is life. #coffee is life. And of course, hit us up on all those other things. But until then, if anybody tells you that you can't have the hobbies you like because of the circumstances of your birth, be it race, religion, creed, gender identity, sexual orientation, your disability, or your budget, you just tell them to take them cards and put them back in the deck. This is Solar Gray, the cinematic sorcerer, saying we'll see you guys next time on How We Roll.